Can you believe it? We are already through the first half of the year, and it is time for the mid-year freakout tag. So after this quick intro, I'll be right back to talk about the books that have me freaking out. If you're new here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. My name is Jen, and this is Horror Literati, the space where academia and horror intersect. So, let's talk about all of these prompts on the mid-year freakout tag. So, there are 13 prompts, and I'm just going to get right into it. So prompt number 1 is the best book you've read so far in 2026. And for me, that is The Devil in Silver by Victor Laval. This book is set in a mental institution, and it deals with the harsh conditions that those with mental illness, of which I am someone, those conditions that this community often faces, the stigma, the abuse. It also deals with themes of racism and xenophobia, and it's a phenomenal book. There is a TV series adaptation on AMC. I've watched the first episode, and I need to get to more. And Victor Laval's The Devil in Silver will make another appearance on this particular list. So it'll be coming again in this video. So the second prompt is the best sequel you've read so far in 2026. Now, to be fair, this is the only sequel I read in 2026, but it was a 5-star read for me. So I would go ahead and probably consider it the best if I happen to get into any other sequels the rest of the year. And that is Dr. Sleep by Stephen King. I did this as a group read, and that definitely enhanced my enjoyment of it. The Shining is one of my favorite King novels, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to get to Dr. Sleep, but that group read had me get into it, and I'm really glad I did. So we follow Danny as an adult, and he is battling the traumatic memories of his father's alcoholism, the abuse that he endured, the situation, the horror that his family faced at the Overlook Hotel. And Daniel is battling his own addictions too. And this is about reclamation and redemption. And it was a wonderful experience. So I highly recommend Dr. Sleep if you haven't read it yet. So the next prompt is a new release you haven't read yet but want to, and that is The Caretaker by Marcus Kluwer. I loved his first novel, We Used to Live Here. So I don't know why. I guess just because of my TBR and the kind of things I've been reading, I haven't gotten to The Caretaker yet, but I'm definitely going to get to it before the end of the year. So let me give you the synopsis for The Caretaker. Macy Mullins can't say why the job posting grabbed her attention. It had the pull of a fisherman's lure, barbed hook and all. Vaguely ominous. But after an endless string of failed job interviews, she's not exactly in a position to be picky. She has rent to pay, groceries to buy, and a younger sister to provide for. Besides, it's only 3 days' work. 3 days cooped up in a stranger's house, surrounded by Oregon coast wilderness. What starts as a peculiar side gig soon becomes a waking nightmare. An unspeakable evil may dwell on this property, and Macy Mullins might just be the only thing standing between it and the rest of humanity. So I already like the premise of this, because a lot of times when you're reading or watching horror books or movies where someone goes to a place and you just keep asking why did they even go there in the first place, or why don't they leave? We already know she's hard up for money. She's had a lot of unlucky breaks, and it's only 3 days. So I'm excited to see what is happening in The Caretaker. So, prompt number 4 is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And bear with me because I do have 3, and I have pre-ordered these 3 books. I have toned down my pre-ordering because I am trying to focus more on reading the books that I own. But these 3 books could not resist, so they did make my pre-order. Therefore, clearly right, they are my most anticipated releases for the second half of the year. So the first is In These Gilded Ghostly Hearts by Gwendolyn Keist. Gwendolyn Keist will appear on this list again too. So let's talk about this book. Stoker winner Gwendolyn Keist holds up a dark, queer mirror to The Great Gatsby in These Gilded Ghostly Hearts, a haunting exploration of the obsession and control at the edges of an American classic. In 1955, Daisy Buchanan is found dead in an abandoned West Egg mansion, but her daughter Mel knows she's really been gone for years. No one knows whether Daisy was murdered or if it was a simpler, slower death. Her years-long spiral of alcohol, abuse, and helplessness. But when Mel enters the estate, she finds Daisy's ghost somehow frozen at 23 and a charming, bleeding phantom that used to be Jay Gatsby. To free her mother, Mel must carve a path through family secrets and decaying revelers, deep into Gatsby's starving house as it gorges itself on unfulfilled love and grows stronger every night. So The Great Gatsby is a classic that I enjoy quite a bit. And just from this synopsis, I feel like Keist has really captured that lost generation, the loss of hopes and dreams, and the alcoholism that pervaded society at this time of the writing of The Great Gatsby in the 1920s, when everything was on the cusp of, the roaring 20s, and then after that you have that crash into the Great Depression. So this death of this so-called American dream. So it's also got this very gothic element because that past is continuing to haunt this space, where Mel has to confront the ghost of her mother and Jay Gatsby and the other revelers who had their hopes and dreams dashed. And so I cannot wait to get into this because I trust Gwendolyn Keist with my life. So the third book that I want to talk about is, I only talked about one. So sorry. My second book I want to talk about that I pre-ordered is Maisie Wood by Tananarive Due, and it comes out on September 22nd. And I should mention In These Gilded Ghostly Hearts comes out on September 15th. So Maisie Wood by Tananarive Due, who is another one of my favorite authors. So let me give you the synopsis for Maisie Wood. S.A. Cosby's All the Sinners Bleed meets Percival Everett's Erasure in this literary thriller following the grandson of a famous black actress from the 1920s to the 1940s, kind of same time period. Now a filmmaker himself who returns to his grandmother's cabin retreat in the California mountains only to encounter the legacy of her rage born in old Hollywood. Award-winning author Tananarive Due returns with the follow-up to the multi-award-winning The Reformatory, which you should read if you haven't, and this generational novel of rage, with flashbacks to Johnny's grandmother, who brushed shoulders with giants like Lena Horne, Clark Gable, and Hattie McDaniel. This novel explores 3 generations, beginning with Maisel Washington's life as a young actress. 50 years after Maisel's death, Johnny will discover the secret she kept and nurtured since she was a child, when she had a dark wish come true. A monster lurks outside Maisie Wood, hidden for generations, and Johnny brought his family to its hunting grounds. See, I didn't even know really. I mean, I didn't know a lot about. I knew In These Gilded Ghostly Hearts was a Gatsby retelling, but I didn't know much about Maisie Wood except it had to do with old Hollywood. So now that I'm talking about both of these books together, I see these connections and similarities between glitz, glamour, decadence, opulence, and then decay and the gothic and being haunted. So I feel like I would love to read both of these together in a vlog coming up in late September. So look for that. All right, and so finally, the third anticipated release that I pre-ordered is Quaint Folk by Bitter Corella, and this comes out on October 6th. This will be my first book from Bitter Corella, so I'm always excited to check out new authors. Quaint Folk is an unapologetically queer and thrillingly subversive take on folk horror like you've never seen before. From Bitter Corella, the Bram Stoker and Shirley Jackson Award nominated author of Moonflow. Welcome to Hazenhurst. The right sort of family would do well here. From the outside, it looks like Jessica has the perfect life. She's a stay-at-home mom, married to a man with a respectable job, raising a son they adore. Her family is as wholesome as apple pie. But deep down, Jessica knows there's something wrong with her. She knows she can't escape her past. When her husband's job has them move abroad, Jessica thinks this is her chance for a fresh start. On the remote island of Hazenhurst, the modern world can't get in. The people there grow their own herbs, make their own jam, and mind their own business. But do they? Do they really mind their own business? I don't know. They believe in folk tales and the power of dreams. They're a quaint, quiet people. Jessica is determined to be the right kind of person for a family and a life like this. But as she tries to befriend the townsfolk and learn their ways, she soon realizes that beneath the town's idyllic nature, something sickly sweet and rotten lays buried. So first of all, I love folk horror. Secondly, I love going, stories about going to this remote place with these quaint people with their old folksy ways. And then because I am obsessed with David Lynch, I'm getting some connection there with this idea of this idyllic, on the surface, quaint, beautiful area, but underneath lies something sinister. So I'm excited. I'm so excited for Quaint Folk. Okay, so the next prompt is biggest disappointment. So I'm glad that I have all the happiness of these coming releases before I have to go into the biggest disappointment. Because I know some people are probably going to be upset with me. My biggest disappointment was North American Late Monsters by Nathan Ballingrud. My book club that I lead, the Literary Love Book Club, we read Nathan Ballingrud's Crypt of the Moon Spider earlier this year or at the end of last year, and most of us loved it, including myself. So I was really excited to get into North American Late Monsters. Now, I do want to say, even though this has got this monster looking creature on the cover and it is called Lake Monsters, this is really more about human monsters, which that's not what disappointed me, because I read the synopsis, so I knew that that was going to be the main focus. Now, there are a couple of other types of monsters in here, but for the most part, we are dealing with human monsters, which fictionally, I like to read about human monsters. Again, fictional. But I was just let down by these short stories. The endings felt very anticlimactic. There were parts of the stories that I did enjoy, and some quotes that I tabbed that I did enjoy. So I do want to share these quotes since I am saying this is my biggest disappointment. It was just meh for me. I think I ended up giving it a 3-star because it was fine. But I was hoping for a 4 or 5-star based on my previous experience with Nathan Ballingrud's work and, my enjoyment of stories like this. But since I have to talk about the disappointment, I do want to talk about the quotes that I enjoy because Nathan Ballingrud is an excellent writer. So this is a quote from the short story Wild Acre. The wind has risen and the forest is a wall of dark sound. The trees no longer distinct from each other, but instead a writhing movement, a grasping energy which prickles his skin and hurries his step. The moon, which only a short while ago seemed a kindly lantern in the dark, smolders in the sky. So I loved this description of the forest and the moon and the wind. Really this dichotomy of the woods. It's peaceful yet threatening. And it can change in a snap. And I appreciated that description because it was also foreshadowing for something that was going to come later. So that was one quote that I wanted to showcase. And then another one, and that's from the story Sun Bleached. Late summer pressed onto this small Mississippi coastal town like the heel of a boot. The heat was an act of violence. Yes, I live in coastal Alabama, so I can 100% relate to that. And I loved that imagery, pressed like the heel of a boot, because it feels oppressive, the heat and the humidity of summer in the areas that, he's talking about, Mississippi Gulf Coast, and then where I live. The heat was an act of violence. Yes, it's an act of violence. Here in South Alabama. Terrible. And then one final quote that I want to share is from The Way Station. A ghost is something that fills a hole inside you where you lost something. It's a memory. Sometimes it can be painful and sometimes it can be scary. Sometimes it's hard to tell where the ghost ends and real life begins. And I love that that concept of the ghost as memory, of us being haunted by memory and not being sure where that memory ends and where real life begins. So thinking in terms of the past being over, but is it really over if it's still affecting us? And then also the concept of memory, it's subjective. It's situational. We may remember something very differently from the way somebody else remembers it, and we may remember something very differently from the way it actually happened. So again, there were some excellent quotes and excellent writing, but overall the stories were a letdown for me. So the next prompt is biggest surprise. So my biggest surprise was Died by Izzy Vaughn. So Izzy is an independent author. This was my first book of hers, and I'm really glad that I read it. I read it for Zombiethon, which is created and hosted by Kat at Kat's Novel Adventures. And this is a unique take on zombies, which is something that is difficult to find. This has to do with addiction, with coming to terms with one's true identity, dealing with past trauma, and being unable to escape pain. It's a shorter, it's a novella, so I don't want to say a lot about it, but just the concept of this kind of zombie, it just matched so well with the themes in the book. This inability to die, inability to be able to escape from your trauma and your addiction. is brilliant. So I highly recommend it. Total pleasant surprise, and I would totally also be reading more from Izzy Vaughn. So the next prompt is favorite new author, debut, or new to you. So new to me, favorite new author is Sarah Tantlinger. And I read To Be Devoured. I actually have an in-depth video about To Be Devoured and The Devil in Silver, which I will link in the description box. But To Be Devoured is about a young woman who has major depressive disorder. Shout out, so do I. And she becomes obsessed with vultures and the act of devouring, but also being devoured. And again, this metaphor of devouring connected to depression. And there are aspects to where you have some pretty gnarly body horror and aspects that are also very fever dream like. It's written just, it's beautifully written. So I would like to share a couple of quotes that just are some of the examples of the beautiful writing. I describe this book as beautifully brutal and grotesquely gorgeous. The moon to my sun, keeping me balanced in a world where my own brain wages civil war with emotions. Very relatable. And then icky warning for those who might be easily icked out. What does it taste like? Dead flesh. Do the bodies haunt the vultures after they consume the carcass? If I eat a human's meat, do they live on inside me forever? And then one more for you all. For whatever reason, my mind has entrapped itself in a dark place this week. The kind of darkness where it's better to avoid the people you love. I can relate. When I get into certain depressive episodes, I do tend to isolate. And part of that, I feel, is just that natural inclination, for depression. But then also, I do it sometimes to protect others from me because of things I may say during those really heavy bouts. So it was a brilliant book. And Sarah Tantlinger is going to be making another appearance on this list too. So now we go to prompt number 8, which is newest fictional crush. And that for me is none. I don't get a lot of fictional crushes in my whole life. Pretty much I only have had one fictional crush, which I still have. But it's not new to me this year, and judge me, I don't care. My fictional crush is Father Karras from The Exorcist, so that will probably always be the one and only. So I don't have a new one this year. Okay, number 9, newest favorite character. Now that I do have, and my newest favorite character is the main character from Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower, Lauren Olamina. And my book club just read this book, so I will link the live show discussion for it down below. But Lauren is the main character. She starts the novel at 15 and the novel continues on, and at the end she's 18. And she is an insightful young woman who seeks to establish a new, more practical religion than the Christianity of her father in the midst of a desolate, ravaged landscape, a collapsed, violent society, and the bleak of horror. And she also has a penchant for not sticking her head in the sand like so many around her do, including the adults. She confronts the horror head on and she does something about it. It's a very empowering, she is a very empowering character, especially relevant to the time period in which we find ourselves living now. And interestingly enough, this novel was set in the years 2024 to 2027, even though Butler wrote it in 1993. The next prompt is book that made you cry. So The Devil in Silver is making another appearance because I cried multiple times for the way that the institutionalized mentally ill patients were treated, and those who may have been placed there who did not even truly have a mental illness, which is, that's neither here nor there. Nobody should be treated the way that these patients were treated. But there is hope. I don't want to leave it just at that bleak. It is bleak because the truth of this is bleak, but it ends on a hopeful note. I will say that much. But yes, I cried multiple times reading this. The second book that made me cry is Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. So this is about a teenage boy whose father died when he was young, and he begins to see his father's ghost, and he starts to try to map out the house to track his father, but it's really a metaphor for grief and trying to come to terms with this idea of the father that you thought you had in your mind, and then realizing maybe he was not who you thought he was. And then there's something else that happens in the end that I can't talk about, that on top of that other layer just added another layer of grief and sorrow, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay. So let's move on to book that made you happy. So one of the books that made me happy was Gwendolyn Keist's The Haunted Houses She Calls Her Own. So this is a collection of stories that feature hauntings of one shape or another. And one of my favorite stories, let me get the title exactly right, The 8 People Who Murdered Me, which is an excerpt from Lucy Westenra's diary. And Dracula's Lucy is one of my favorite characters in all of classic lit, and for her to get her reclamation and a reimagining of her story and a story of her life from her own point of view, that's just one of the things that Gwendolyn Keist does an amazing job of, is to reclaim the stories of marginalized or, stigmatized women in classic literature. So this book made me very, very happy. The next book that made me happy is a nonfiction book from the Devil's Advocate series, and that is In the Mouth of Madness by Michael Blythe. So this is a book analyzing John Carpenter's movie In the Mouth of Madness, and I tabbed so many points in this book. So he goes through in this book and talks about how this In the Mouth of Madness was metafictional before metafiction became like a big thing. It was a commentary on the way that fandom can become obsessed, and also with the H.P. Lovecraft layer, even though it does not directly adapt one of H.P. Lovecraft's stories, it is one of the best, if not the best, film adaptations of H.P. Lovecraft, because you have someone reading something that they maybe shouldn't read because it's known to cause delusions. People start doing crazy things. There's a big blurring of the lines between what's real and what's fiction. Who's in charge of the story? Is it Sutter Kane, the author? Is it these old gods, he says, are, writing the story through him? The main character, John Trent, is he real or is he fiction? There's just so much. And I would really probably need to spend an entire video devoted just to talking about this book, but it was just the best time. Short and sweet and packs so much analysis into it. So the next prompt is most beautiful book you've bought or received this year so far. So the first one is a book that I did buy, another one by Sarah Tantlinger after reading To Be Devoured, and this is Cyanide Constellations and Other Stories. So I just love this cover. And the second book that I feel like is one of the most beautiful I've gotten this year was a gift from my son for my birthday. And that is, get that ring light glare off some if I can. Gilded Needles by Michael McDowell. I just love it. All right. And then finally, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I don't know about, about need to. I want to, though. And those books are The Library at Hellebore, which honestly, that is another beautiful cover too. The Hellebore Technical Institute for the Gifted is the premier academy for the dangerously powerful, the Antichrist and Death Workers, the World Eaters and Apocalypse Makers. Hellebore promises redemption, acceptance, and a normal life after graduation. At least that's what Alessa Lee is told after she's kidnapped and forcibly enrolled. But the Institute is more than just a haven for monsters. On graduation day, the faculty embark on a ravenous rampage, feasting on their students. Trapped in the school's cavernous library, Alessa and her surviving classmates must do something they were never taught: work together. If they don't, this school will eat them alive. And I was just looking at the end pages too. Looks like pomegranates and a fly, maybe? And I forgot to say, this is by Cassandra Call. And I've read from Cassandra Call before, Nothing But Blackened Teeth, which I actually loved, and The Salt Grows Heavy, which I also loved. So the next book that I am wanting to read before the end of the year is Spoiled Milk by Avery Curran. I really like this cover too. In 1928, Emily Locke's final year at the isolated Briarley School for Girls is derailed when Violet, the school's brightest star and a cunning beauty for whom Emily will do anything, falls to her death on her 18th birthday. Emily and her buttoned-up rival Evelyn are, for once, in agreement. Violet's death was no accident. There's an obvious culprit, the French schoolmistress with whom Violet was getting a little too close. They need only to prove it. Desperate for answers, Emily and her classmates turn to spiritualism, hoping for a glimpse of wisdom from the great beyond. To their shock, Violet's spirit appears, choosing pious Evelyn as her unlikely medium, and Violet has a warning for them. The danger has just begun. Something deadly is infecting Briarley. It starts with rotten food and curdled milk, but quickly grows more threatening. As the body count rises and the students race to save themselves, Emily must confront the fatal forces poisoning the school. Emily's fight for survival forces her to reevaluate everything she knows about Evelyn, Violet, Briarley, and ultimately herself. Avery Curran channels the indelible ambiance and intrigue of the classic boarding school novel while turning the beloved genre on its head in this visceral, exuberant debut. Excited. And then finally, the last book that I want to make sure I get to this year is one I wanted to get to before and haven't, and that is Dark Sisters by Christy DeMeester. I have read from Christy DeMeester before, Such a Pretty Smile and Beneath, and I loved both, and I've enjoyed her short stories that I've read in anthologies also. In this fiercely captivating novel, horror meets historical fiction when a curse bridges generations, binding the fates of three women. Anne Bolton, a healer facing persecution for witchcraft, bargains with a dark entity for protection, but the fire she unleashes will reverberate for centuries. Mary Shepherd, a picture-perfect wife in a suffocating community, falls for Sharon and begins a forbidden affair that could destroy them both. And Camilla Burson, the rebellious daughter of a preacher, defies conformist expectations to uncover an ancient power as her father's flock spirals into crisis. Three women, 3 centuries, one legacy of fury, love, and a power that refuses to die. So this is always a fun tag. I would love for you to do this tag too. If you do, tag me so I can watch your video. If you don't want to do the tag, or if you don't have a booktube channel, then let me know down in the comments below which of these prompts you answer, whichever one, all, a few. So let me know what books you would choose for the prompts. And I would love also for you to hit like, subscribe, hit that bell so we can keep on talking about books. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and happy reading.